And joining us now to introduce the encore presentation from the Diamond Dollars Case Competition is Vince Gennaro. Vince is the co-founder of the SABR Analytics Conference and the architect of the Diamond Dollars Case Competition. Vince is the author of Diamond Dollars, the economics of winning in baseball, and host of the weekly national radio show Behind the Numbers, Baseball SABR Style on SiriusXM. He's also the Associate Dean and Clinical Associate Professor for NYU's Preston Robert Tisch Institute for Global Sport. Vince, it's really great to see you again, and I can't wait for you to share this year's case and the winning team with the conference.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. It's great to be back at the SABR Analytics Conference, and I'd like to be able to see everyone, but that's not the way this works, I guess. So too many people, 172 people to put on a screen is a little tough. So, well, thank you again, and I'm delighted to be here. This has become an annual event within the SABR Analytics Conference, and that is sharing the winners and the winning presentation, the overall winning presentation from the Diamond Dollars Case Competition. I want to tell you a little bit about the case, then I'm going to tell you who the winners were, the 5 winners, one in each of the tracks that we had, competitive tracks, and then I'll introduce you to the overall winning team, which will be presenting today and sharing their case results. The case this year was about baseball's action index. And first of all, let me preface this by saying to many of us diehard baseball fans, which I certainly put myself in the category of, we may not feel that the game needs radical change or even tweaking. We may be perfectly content with where it is today, but the reality is that not everyone sees it that way. In fact, younger people typically don't see it that way. So if baseball is going to sustain itself at the level of commercial success that it has today, which in many ways is in all of our best interests as ardent baseball fans, it's going to have to make some modifications and some changes. As you know, in the recent collective bargaining agreements, some of those have already happened. The universal DH, there's talk about the details still having to be worked out on some sort of timing mechanism for pitches, meaning the pitch clock between, for time between pitches, and possibly altering where players can stand in the field, and all those things are under consideration. So what I posed to the group in this year's case was that while the highlights from a baseball game are as remarkable today as they've ever been, in a way, baseball to many has become an inefficient form of entertainment. And what I mean by that is there's simply, the highlights are high, but there's too much space in between those highlights. Part of it is the game, the length of the game, what, 3 hours and 10 or 11 minutes these days. And also the decline of baseball's in play. Many more at-bats end in the resolution of a walk or a strikeout. You could argue whether a home run is a ball in play, at least it's a batted ball. So what I asked the students to do was I calculated for them the action index, which is very simply the number of batted balls per game. It happens to be 50, and you can calculate, the games are 191 minutes long, so you can begin to calculate how much elapsed time there is between a batted fair ball. So I asked them to propose changes to the game of baseball. Of course, many of those things are already being discussed and considered. Quantify those changes and the impact that they would have on increasing batted balls in play, and simply recalculate after your prescribed changes what you would what the new action index would be. So 20 student teams from all around the country. We had 5 high school teams. We had some graduate school teams, some undergraduate school teams, some were mixed, but 15 college teams and 5 high school teams competed. And they were in tracks of 4 teams per track. So there were 5 winners. And I'm happy to say that 2 of the 5 high school teams were the winners in their track. So let me just read off the winners, and then we'll get to the grand overall winner who will present today. One of the winners was the Branson School out of Ross, California. That's a high school. And the captain of that team is Wilson Went. So congratulations to Wilson and his team. St. John Fisher College out of the Rochester area. And Brandon Smith, who was the captain of that team, was a winner. Maggie L. Walker Governor's School out of Richmond, Virginia, the other high school. And the captain of that team was Jonah Curran. They had multiple entries, but one of their teams did win in that session. And then Elon University out of North Carolina, and Zach Chioffi was the captain of that team. These are 4 to 5 student teams. The overall winner was the team from Tufts. And Andrew Holden, who is here today with, I believe, at least one of his teammates, will be presenting to you their case. And again, just so you understand what they were asked to do, just to reiterate, they were asked to essentially propose changes to the game. And by the way, I did say, I want you to balance creativity with making the game, keeping the game recognizable to the large fan base that it is today. And that's, of course, a fine line, right? It means something different to everyone. And so what you'll hear today are the approach they took to evaluating those changes, quantifying what those changes would be, and what the end result will be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew, and we'll be here for questions, of course, at the end of this. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Put up our slides and we'll get started. All right, Evan, you're good to go.
All right, yeah. Thank you so much for that introduction again, and thank you all for being here today. We're baseball analytics at Tufts, and this will be our presentation on the action index. Next slide. Yeah, so I guess I'll just go over real quick what we'll be talking about today. First, we'll go over some background, introducing sort of the problem at hand as Mr. Gennaro was talking about. Then we'll go for an overview of our rule changes. Then we'll get into our methodology and results for our first rule and our second rule. And then finally, we'll finish up with some future analysis and other ideas we had. So starting off with some background, here we can see a graph of fan attendance in MLB between 1960 and the present. And as you can see, there's been generally an upward trend in fan attendance, mostly because of the increase in capacity of MLB stadiums. But one thing you can notice is that around like the 2007 area, you see a bit of a decline in fan attendance. So as Mr. Gennaro introduced, the action index is basically a measure of average batted balls per game. Any batted ball is plate appearances minus walks, hit by pitches, and strikeouts. And then batted balls per number of games is the action index. And there's also an additional penalty for increasing the game length of 0.25 to the action index for every minute you extend the game over 190 minutes. Looking at a graph of the action index between 1960 and now, you can see it pretty much held steady until like the early to mid 2000s. And then we see around that 2007 area, another steep drop off there. So putting the action index and fan attendance side by side, and then marking that 2007 as sort of a cutoff point, we can really see that both the action index and fan attendance started to decline around 2007. So the questions that we asked ourselves when we were going through this process was, what are the factors that affect a game's action index? What rules can we implement to control and change these factors? And then how do we increase action index without drastically changing the core way that the game of baseball is played? So for an overview of our rule changes, our first rule change is to move the pitcher's mound back. And then going along with that, we're gonna lower the strike zone. And then our second rule change will be to require infielders to position themselves a little bit further in than they normally do right now. So I'll hand it over to Andrew to talk about our first rule change.
All right, so our first rule change suggestion is to move the pitcher's mound back and to also lower the strike zone. So when looking at how do we analyze moving the mound back, we analyze the relationship between average pitch velocity and batted ball percentage. We looked at fastball velocity and curveball velocity because they are less correlated than other pitches. Guys with higher fastball velocities tend to have higher changeup velocities. And this was formalized using a variance inflation factor of 1.79. And as long as that's below 5, we know there's limited collinearity. So we were good to do some regression on fastball velocity and curveball velocity. So this is the data we were looking at. Here we have a scatter of data points of average curveball velocity and average fastball velocity and batted ball percentage. So as we can see from the scale on the right, the darker colors are lower batted ball percentage. And we can see that batted ball percentage decreases as curveball and fastball velocity increase. So we fit a plane to this data. And on the left chart, we can see as fastball velocity increases, batted ball percentage decreases. And then on the right, we add in the curveball axes, and we see a similar trend in that direction as well. So with this information, how does moving the mound back increase action index? How far should we move it back, and how much does the reaction time change by? So to analyze the results of moving a mound back, we looked at the physics of a pitch, and we did so using kinematic equations from David Kagan's article. And we computed accelerations, initial velocities, displacement, vertical and horizontal pitch break for fastballs using the StatCast and PitchFX data from the 2019 season. And we did that so we could get an average reaction time of fastballs. So we repeated these calculations at different mound distances, changing the displacement in the y-axis, which is towards the pitcher. And using the kinematic equations, we can come to a flight time for fastballs, and we can convert that back to an equivalent effective velocity at the current mound distance. And we repeat this for curveballs. And we get putting this into our regression plane, we get a batted ball percentage as a function of fastball and curveball speed, and we can convert this to runs per game. So here we have a plot of mound distance and our projected action index. From each mound distance, we have a corresponding average fastball and curveball velocity. So our suggestion is to move the mound back 2 feet, and with that, we get a predicted batted balls per game of 54.35. And to gauge how good our model is at predicting these batted balls per game, we know the data, the action index from the 2019 season. And if we plug that into our regression using 2019 average fastball and curveball velocity, we had an error rate of less than 2% for the current mound distance. So one important consideration when moving the mound back is pitches are going to drop more. And using the same kinematic equations, we can calculate the average increase in vertical drop on a fastball after moving the mound back 2 feet. And we got an average increase in drop of 1.48 inches. So knowing that fastballs on average are going to drop an extra about 1.5 inches, we start to look at where batted balls occur in the zone. So here we have a plot of a random sample of fastballs and whether or not they were batted ball with the zone for reference. So to get a better idea of where batted balls are most likely, we perform lowest regression on the likelihood of a fastball becoming a batted ball based on its location. So we fit contour lines to this regression, and we can see the regions at 0.1 probability intervals. Even in the most likely locations, all likelihoods of becoming a batted ball are less than 0.4. So that makes traditional classification methods a little bit more difficult. So we just went with regression on the likelihood of becoming a batted ball. And one thing we noticed looking at these contour lines is that they're not in the middle of the zone. They are biased towards the lower end of the zone. So noticing that, we decided to see what would happen if we lowered the zone by about 1.5 inches and increased fastball drop. So on the chart on the right, we can see after lowering the zone, the contour lines are much more centered in the zone. And the 2 dots in the middle show the average 2019 fastball location at 60.5 feet on top, and then moving it back 2 feet on the bottom, so you can see how much more pitches are going to drop. So by lowering the zone, we hope to force pitchers to throw more pitches in the locations that are most likely to become batted balls. And this 1.5 inch lowering of the zone has the added benefit of, in addition to moving the mound back, if we do both at the same time, pitchers should not have to change anything mechanically about how they throw their fastballs, because a top of the zone fastball in the current strike zone at the current mound distance, if we move it back, it's going to drop the 1.5 inches and hit the top of our new zone. So how do we measure the effect of lowering the strike zone? We fit a 2-dimensional Gaussian distribution to a sample of fastballs using expectation maximization. We sampled from that distribution and computed the mean batted ball likelihood based on that, and then repeated that, lowering the Gaussian about 1.5 inches. And on the right, we see that after lowering the Gaussian, we see a higher density of pitches lower in the current zone. Both zones are the current zone, so we can see for reference that lowering the zone and thus the target of where pitchers are aiming, we have more pitches lower in the zone, which, as we saw from the regression contours, are more likely to become batted balls. So in total, after lowering the zone, the probability of a batted ball increased on average from 0.181 to 0.184, which is a 1.66% increase in batted balls on fastballs. So combining this with our analysis of moving the mound back, from moving the mound back 2 feet, we had a predicted 54.35 batted balls per game. And in 2019, about 44% of batted balls came from fastballs. So using that 1.66% increase, we get a predicted batted balls per game of 54.75. And on the left, we have a chart of game duration and batted balls per game. And we see a decent negative correlation, which makes sense because batted balls result in shorter at-bats than strikeouts and walks. And fitting a line to that and using our batted balls per game number, we get a predicted game time of 176.6 minutes. So since 176 is less than 190, there's no action index game time penalty. So our final action index is 54.75. which, as we look back of the action index over time, puts us in the range of the early 2010s, with 2010 and 2013 being the closest seasons in terms of action index. And although action index does not reward decreasing game length, we think it's a step in the right direction that we project our games will be about 15 minutes shorter on average than the 2021 season after implementing these changes. So a couple limitations of our analysis on moving mound back and lowering the zone is the physics of off-speed pitches are more complex. We don't know how much more they will break that will require more physics. And breaking pitches vary a lot from player to player, so the effects of moving the mound back will vary from player to player. So that's why we stuck with analysis on fastballs for what we were doing. And another thing we were concerned about is, would decreasing the effective velocity of pitches result in a change in pitch usage? On the left, we plotted fastball percentage and fastball velocity and we don't see much of a correlation there, and ours squared of just 0.05. So we do not believe these changes will result in significant pitch usage changes. And lastly, lowering the strike zone by about 1.5 inches is very specific, and it would be difficult for human umpires to enforce such a change.
Thank you, Andrew. And with that, we're going to get into our second rule change, which is pulling the back of the infielder in by about 5 feet and requiring each infielder to position themselves with 2 feet on the dirt at the beginning of each pitch. So the reason we want to make this change is because we want to increase BABIP on ground balls, BABIP being batting average on balls in play. On the left, you'll see kind of the two extreme examples of BABIP. And when the infield is positioned normally, you'll see about a 296 BABIP on ground balls and short line drives. But when the infield is in, you'll see a 366 BABIP on the same ground balls and short line drives. The further the infield goes in, essentially, the higher the BABIP will be. And on the right, you'll see the new standard infield alignment under our rule change and how exactly the infield would be affected. It's not likely that the first baseman and the third baseman will change their positioning. This change would mostly affect middle infielders. Next slide. We're going to show a couple examples, one by a right-handed hitter and one by a left-handed hitter, of ground balls hit to infielders playing really deep. And these are kind of the ground balls that we want to turn into hits. These are these plays are made by players on the Minnesota Twins who had fairly deep infield positioning throughout 2021. And you'll see an example of a ball hit to the shortstop and the second baseman. And Evan is going to tell you why we want to convert some of these ground balls to hits and the effectiveness that that'll have on raising the action index.
Yeah, so as Richard mentioned, the goal of this rule change is to increase ground ball BABIP, but why do we actually want to do that? What's that going to do for our action index? So we decided that ground balls, especially to middle infielders, represented a pretty large portion of balls and plays that could potentially be hits. In 2021, ground balls were 45% of all batted balls. And so as we increase ground ball BABIP, we'll also increase the run value on ground balls. In 2021, you can see we had a negative 0.066 run value on ground balls versus a positive 0.057 run value on fly balls. And so as we close the gap between ground balls and fly balls, their run value, we'll be able to incentivize ground ball hitters and a style of play where putting the ball on the ground is promoted. This plot on the right, it really shows us what we already intuitively thought we knew, right? It tells us that there's a pretty good negative correlation between true ground ball percentage and strikeout percentage. As guys hit more balls on the ground, they're going to strike out less. And so as we incentivize ground ball hitters, hopefully we'll see a decrease in strikeouts and decrease in action index. Next slide. So what do our results really tell us? What we did was we fit a linear relationship between average middle infielder depth and ground ball BABIP using the BABIP data from Sports Info Solutions. The Sports Info Solutions data actually used the increase or decrease in depth of all four infield positions, whereas our rule change really only affects the middle guys, and we adjusted for that, noting that approximately 2/3 of ground balls are hit within the range of middle infielders and not corner infielders. Our analysis ended up telling us that decreasing middle infield depth by about 5 feet gave us a new BABIP of 0.302, so a 6-point increase from 296. And then that 6-point increase in BABIP gave us a new run value on ground balls of negative 0.037, which is almost a 50% increase from negative 0.066 previously. And what this analysis really tells us is that what we intuitively thought to be true, that as people play closer to the batter, they have less reaction time, they have less range, and more ground balls are going to get through, it makes sense in our mind, and it makes sense in this analysis too. So some limitations of our analysis. As I mentioned before, the Sports Info Solutions study used BABIP with a change in depth of all four infield positions, whereas we're only accounting for the middle infielders moving in. And we did make that adjustment with the percent of ground balls hit to middle infielders, but it was an estimate, and it's definitely not a perfect adjustment. The study also used BABIP on ground balls and short line drives, whereas in our calculation of run value on ground balls, we could only account for balls hit on the ground, and we didn't really have a way of accounting for short line drives too. A big limitation is that we really don't know the real relationship between infield depth and BABIP. we assumed it to be linear, but we would need a lot more data points to know whether that relationship actually is linear or maybe it's quadratic or something. So we really didn't know the relationship there. Another thing was we weren't entirely sure how one infielder's positioning might affect another. So as a shortstop or second baseman moves in, is that going to push a first baseman and third baseman further back? We're not really sure how that works. And then a big one is that increasing ground ball BABIP and the run value on ground balls, this rule change isn't going to directly increase the action index, right? It's something that will incentivize a style of player that in theory will increase action index by decreasing strikeouts. But after the rule is implemented, we would need to wait a couple of years to see if that change actually really evolved. So in our future analysis, we really just want to address the limitations that we noted in our presentation today. As Andrew mentioned, we weren't able to account for the physics of breaking pitches or non-fastballs because they're much more complicated, but we would love to be able to model the effect of moving the mound back and lowering the zone for all pitches, not just fastballs. And then, as we just talked about, we would love to actually understand the real relationship between ground ball BABIP and infield positioning, and how different guys' positioning will affect their teammates' positioning.
So some of the other ideas that we considered were banning the shift. However, we decided to go with having infielders play with both feet on the dirt because banning the shift would likely promote a style of play where players continue to pull the ball and kind of hit a lot of home runs, but also strike out a lot. And those players aren't necessarily conducive to raising the action index. We considered setting a pickoff limit to try and get more runners in scoring position and hoping that batters swing and miss less with runners in scoring position. It turns out they do not. We considered deadening the baseball. However, MLB isn't really transparent with when the baseball is deadened, so to speak. So we decided against that approach. And one of the more fun ideas we had was possibly imposing a team weight limit, hoping that maybe heavier players are people that contribute to the action index going down. And it turns out the heavier the player is, it does not matter. Heavier players don't necessarily strike out more. Next slide. Lastly, we wanted to thank Fangraphs, Baseball Savant, Retro Sheets, Andrew Kine of Sports Info Solutions, and David Kagan for the data we used in our presentation. And we wanted to thank you all for listening, and we're open to any questions. Thank you.
Andrew and team, if you guys want to look at the Q&A function in the bottom of the Zoom module, you should be able to take some questions there.
Yeah, so I see. All right, one question. How do you decide?
Yeah, the first question for your group would begin with the one from Ronan there.
From Ronan, all right. Do we see any negative effects on pitchers' health when moving the mound back 2 feet? Is it significant enough where they would have to relearn how to throw strikes? So we didn't measure pitchers' health in any way. Part of the idea of moving the mound down, the increase in vertical drop on a fastball was pitchers in theory would not have to change anything about their fastball mechanics with the new zone. And hold on, I lost the question. Where's the rest of it?
I think Robin asked, how do we decide what to include in the action index and like what our thoughts are on accounting for pitcher success and strikeouts. So the action index is a calculation that was given to us, and it's really trying to. The point of increasing the action index is actually to decrease pitcher strikeouts. And so definitely personally to me, I love watching a guy strike out, a guy on the mound dominating and striking out a lot of batters. But in the case of action index and increasing sort of the watchability of the game to casual fans, strikeouts aren't really conducive to increasing like fan engagement. And so really the impact, our rules were really trying to, at the crux of it, it was trying to decrease strikeouts.
Yeah, if
So
I could just add
Tracy-
to that,
Oh, yeah.
just to embellish. Yeah, I mean, I gave them the action index, so they had no latitude. I wanted to simplify it, and it's really agnostic with respect to pitcher or hitter success. It's all about fan success, I guess, if you will, in getting more action. The thought being that when a batted ball occurs, and you could argue that a home run fits this category or doesn't, that's a different story. But when a batted ball occurs, 8 or 9 people on the diamond are all moving around, and there's something interesting going on to certainly the casual fan and even the average fan. So that was what we're trying to increase. And strikeouts are part of it in a way, in that they are explicitly excluded from the action index, as are walks.
So Tracy asks, would you change the height of the mound? Would the pitcher need to reduce the number of pitches he could throw because he has to throw harder to make up the distance? We did not look at the effects of changing the height of the mound. We were just looking at changing the distance because that's easier to measure using physics. And because our kinematics equations included acceleration, we included the decrease in speed of the pitch as it travels. So our analysis was on if pitchers did not change anything about how they threw. Pitchers, as they have continued to do over time, are likely going to continue trying to throw harder and harder, because the harder you throw, the more success you'll see. So throwing harder was likely inevitable, no matter whether we move the mound back or not. John asks, I believe moving the mound back actually increased batted ball percent and K percent in the Atlantic League in 2021. Was this a concern when considering your first rule change? Yes, so walk rate was something that we were concerned about, and that is likely going to come in with further analysis of breaking pitches, because they'll have more room to break and they can end up farther from the strike zone. And so looking at more physics of breaking pitches, we would like to be able to see how moving the mound back would affect walk rate a little more in depth.
Ellie asked about our pickoff limitation idea. And so for that one, we didn't specifically address pickoffs. Our idea was that as if you held constant the number of people reaching first base, but incentivized them to steal and get into scoring position at second and third base, that would our idea was that maybe someone at the plate with a runner on third or runner on second is more incentivized to put the ball in play to drive in a run with a single, whereas a guy with a runner on first doesn't want to hit into a double play, or a guy with nobody on base wants to try and swing for the fences. So we thought that hitting with runners in scoring position would increasing the number of at-bats with runners in scoring position would decrease the strikeouts, but we didn't see a very good correlation between at-bats with runners in scoring position and decreased strikeouts.
Thomas asked, was there any thought on as to how these rule changes would impact historic numbers? We didn't really look at that as much, but in our regression model, it was based on the 2019 season. So, well, our mound distance information was, so in a sense, we use the 2019 season as a reference, but we can go back and put past seasons using league average data into our batted ball and mound distance regression plane. So we could go back and do that and it would work.
Gabe asks about possible infielder safety implications with both increased exit velocity and moving the infielders in. This was something that we considered. However, even though there would be more hard hit balls likely with the pitches being slower and the infielders would have to play closer, it wouldn't really affect first and third basemen, who are maybe the infielders that are most at risk in terms of getting injured from hot shot ground balls. Since moving moving infielders in would really only affect the middle infielders, we eventually determined that we weren't too worried about a possible spike in injuries among infielders during ground balls.
Again, another question about lowering the mound. It was an idea that we had, but using the kinematics equations, it's easier to calculate using displacement versus a change in angle. So it's something that could also be looked at, definitely.
Christian asked about commercial times and also the increased amount of relievers. The commercial time wasn't something that we were really able to account for because we were only making changes. We were only making rule changes about the product on the field. So we weren't really controlling what happened off the field. We did think about the number of pitching changes and number of relievers being used. However, I think the biggest factor for us there was actually pitcher safety. So for someone like decreasing the number of pitchers on a roster, having to stretch guys out for longer and throw more pitches and more often seemed like that would actually be pretty detrimental to pitcher safety right now. So that's why we didn't really try and change anything there.
If I could just comment on the other tactics that one could use to add action to the game. I will tell you that with 19 other teams presenting, you can imagine the full range of options that were tossed out and not presented here today because this is one team, but the mound height was mentioned a number of times. Commercial time, even though Evan was staying within the confines of what I asked him to do, some did try to evaluate the way commercial time could change and speed up the game. The number of relievers, banning the shift. Some student teams actually put a value in action in terms of the universal DH, which is happening. So there were lots of others. With this, we gave you a snapshot today of what we thought was probably the most cogent, well thought out, well articulated, and well reasoned presentation. Not to say that their recommendations were the favorite of the judges, so to speak, but they were certainly, the best of the lot.
It looks like we have one last question. Was there any effect on the number of double plays with infielders in? So we didn't have a lot of data on infield position depth, which is why we had to look at the two extremes of someone else's study of regular infield depth versus infield fully in. So we weren't able to account for more subtle changes such as double play rates of that.
All right.
Effective. All right.
Congratulations again to the Diamond Dollars case competition team from Tufts, Andrew Holden, Brendan Tivnan, Evan Hugh, Joshua Ober, and Richard Diamond. Thank you guys so much and great job. And thanks again to Vince Gennaro for putting the case competition together this year and every year. That concludes our second session today. Thanks to our research presenters, David Hyland, Jeremy Losak, Julia Wapner, and Xander Schwartz, as well as our panelists, Ben Jedlovic, Joel Feinberg, Clay Nunnally, and Sid Satyapathy. We also appreciate our sponsors, Major League Baseball, Rawlings, and SMT for supporting today's session programming. We will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for the final day of the conference. There's a new Zoom link for that session. So be on the lookout for that in your email inbox, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Thanks.